Alright, what a day. There's already some in there. Perfect. Alright. Bears and bees. Holy cow. I've never seen so many bears up north in this area as I have this past week. We've only seen one with our eyes, but the trail cameras I've left out, it's non-stop bears. It's crazy. I've had a bunch of some scraps not too far from camp from that elk harvest. So, I'm not going down here without my trusty equalizer for that 1 in a million. 1 in a million is still a chance, right? Lots of people get caught with a 1 in a million. Speaking of that, here's a story. So Sarah went on I can't believe how she's been doing. I can't believe it. She has bypassed everybody's guesses, friendly guesses. I said 3 days tops, so she probably want to go home. She thought 5. The daughter said 2. And she doesn't want to go home. She's getting very tired, but she doesn't want to go home. She wants that second elk bad, and we've come so close. It's so hot. It was probably the worst hunting conditions you could ever choose. They're not bugling, they're not calling, and they're in the thick jungle. But every single little minor plan I've been coming up with has been working. We had 2 bulls close to us this morning and a cow about 10 yards away from us. Found a huge wallow, found a bunch of fresh bull sign. So I'm gonna go. I found a closer route to get up into this middle of this jungle, and she wants to go, so tomorrow's going to be one more huge hike. So I'm making her nap right now. Anyway, the story. So we're walking along. I did a big hike because some roads got deactivated, so I couldn't get into this great spot, so we had to hike in there. It took about half an hour to get through a big stand of mature spruce tree and then get onto this old cut line that's grown in. What I didn't know was the opposite end of the cut line it had never been on before. I guess you can get in from there. So I already had a couple young bulls up to us using a cow call, and they're walking back into the cut line so I could head up to the top of the mountain in the timber. And then I heard this real bad elk bugle from a hunter coming from that direction up the cut line. I'm like, ah, shit, somebody's in here, holy cow. So he's coming swiftly down the cut line towards us. I was in the middle. I had a gray pullover shirt on with a zipper, gray, not camouflage either. Sarah's behind me. And I clearly see the guy about 60 yards, maybe 70 tops, up the cut line trail. I can see him clear from head to toe. He's a human being, which means he should see me clearly as a human being, right? So I just went like this, like that. Took 2 more steps, and all of a sudden he stops. He starts going like this, bringing his rifle up to point at us. And I'm like, hey, hey, hey! Right as I'm pushing Sarah off to the side behind some trees. That's weird. When you know you're in full sight of a human being and you're a human being and they go to raise their weapon to point at you, holy shit. Right? And then I was gonna give him, obviously be fair, if he continued to raise that weapon up after I spoke out to him, it was gonna be frickin', I don't know what was going to happen, but it wasn't going to end. It wouldn't have ended well, that's for sure. Crazy, right? And then I went up and started talking to the guy. It was an older guy. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt of possibly being a dumbass. And I explained to him where we came from. I didn't realize that you could actually get in there from the other side of the timber where they came in from. He said, "Well, I got another guy up towards that area too. He's in that area too, where you said you're going to head." I'm like, well, whatever. I'm pretty certain he's not going where I'm going. Well, you got to be careful. You got to be really careful because he's inexperienced. Like warning us. Like what? What, he's inexperienced and he's going to intentionally shoot me? What are you trying to frickin' say, you psycho? I'll tell you what, there's sometimes some people, they just should be in the woods, right? I mean, if he's actually got a partner with him and he thinks he needs to warn other people that the guy's in the woods and is dangerous, really? Holy shit. But anyway, I knew there's no way they'd be going where I was going because I'm going straight up the mountain in the big mature timber, and sure enough I could tell after about half an hour we started getting tight to elk, so I knew they weren't anywhere near. There's my story. Creepier than shit, right? The guy going to raise a gun at us with no cover in between us. Wow. Anyway, voices to be heard. Let's get into it. I'm behind in hearing important voices. Now here we go. What do we got? I think this is going to be older emails, not marked as read. Did a lot of recents lately. Maybe a close encounter, question mark. Thanks for helping me remember this, Steve. First found your channel a few months ago. Sorry to hear about your horse in a couple of your emails. Animals are very special beings, pals, companions. When you said, quote, the hair on your body was like wire, end quote, with my goosebumps, it took me back to one hunting experience that I had immediately. I've had a lot of hunting experience, but this one stands out by itself, and I'd filed it away. It must have been around 07 or 06 when it happened. I did feel fear, or I was scared a little bit, but did not smell anything. I was in a lock-on stand very early in the morning, about 14 feet up in the rain, waiting for the front to move on. I've been camping since I was 10, so rain was not a big deal. I know what rain and drip sound like, but this sounded like heavy footsteps. First one side of the tree, then the other. A cat would not make any noise at all. It was so dark that you could not see your hand in front of your face. Close your eyes, and same view was there, very dark. I did not hear any footsteps leaving or any coming. Not anything at all. This happened about 40 yards from an UT to the PD River, west of the PD and south of US 74 near the bridge, a couple of miles south. I did not share this experience at hunting camp. There are some things you don't share at camp. I left and went back to the four-wheeler about 100 yards, and behind me when it got light enough to climb down, but when I heard you say, quote, the hair on your body was like wire, end quote, it made me remember and took me back to that morning instantly. And I mean like it was yesterday. Only one of my many trips to the woods did this happen. The area was very remote. It was investment timber properties, 5,000 to 6,000 acres plus, 8 or more big tracts, maybe more, west of Rockingham, North Carolina. Cougar, big cat? As I was driving to the same hunting camp early one morning, about 5:15 a.m., I left the house about 3:30 a.m., when I saw a golden retriever running through a peach orchard. I thought to myself, what's a golden retriever doing here at this time of day? Then it jumped 15 feet from the center of the road in front of me and up a 4-foot bank and into the woods, and what made me wake up fully was the long rope tail with the end upturned like a cat jumping. I was very awake and excited when I reached camp. My eyes were like saucers, they told me. The funny thing is, animals/beings don't read books about where they're supposed to be or how they're supposed to act. The state biologist told me, and a friend in Scouts told me it was something else, but I know what I saw. Thanks, Steve, for you do. If you can get to a dollar store, you can get $1 readers. I get 10 at a time and put them all around. Thanks, Lars. Okay, man. Thanks. I got them all over the place right now, too. Yeah, I know people that are wildlife biologists, and I have respect for them. Stupid fly. And I don't mean this personally to them. I just mean this as I don't even know how to say it correctly right now. I'm so tired. I don't give a shit at this current stage of my knowledge gaining. I don't care what credentials you have. Human, made up and given credentials. Zero. Does not do anything for me at all. Except perhaps when I go to the dentist. Right? But you know what I mean. A wildlife biologist and these topics have nothing in relation at all. Nothing. It's true. It's true. Wildlife biologist. Wildlife. Not this topic. This topic isn't wildlife, right? Appreciate that email, man. Australian Yowie Stories, title this email. Hi Steve, love your channel. Good work in getting people's stories out there. These stories I have are not my own. I live on the Sunshine Coast, Queensland, Australia. A lot of my spare time goes into water-based activities, mainly spear diving and fishing. I've done a bit of hunting for red deer and pigs when I was a teenager, but never had any funny encounters. I've always been interested in Bigfoot, UFOs, and hidden history that has been suppressed by the powers that be, so I am always having conversations with people about those subjects, and often get stories about UFOs and the occasional Bigfoot story, or Yowie as we call them over here. The first story is from a longtime friend of my dad's. He's a manager of a very large supply company in Brisbane, and a very honest person. He told my father about a time when him and his mate were fishing at the banks of the Coochin Creek, a creek that flows near Beerwah State Forest. They were sitting near the water. Just as the sun was going down, they both started to hear a very large noise coming through the dense bush next to them. At first they thought it was cattle because there's cattle farms around that area, and often cattle are seen around the location. There's a very loud crashing, and it was apparent it was heading in their direction. Suddenly, something broke through the trees right near the bank. They both realized that it was no cow, but instead, an 8 to 9 foot tall, hairy creature. They took notice of them and jumped straight into the creek, which was about 6 feet deep, and strode across it, getting out at the other side and continued to stomp through the bush until it was out of hearing range. The two of them packed up their fishing gear and hightailed it out of there as quick as they could. The second story is from an old fellow on a construction site I worked on. I've been paired up with him for weeks, so we had a lot of chats about all sorts of things. It took him quite a while to come out with his story, and he kept saying that I'm not shitting you, it was real, before he did eventually tell it. Basically, when he was a boy back in the mid-70s, he lived out in the rural areas west of the Sunshine Coast. Him and his friends used to play hide-and-seek in the dense bush. One day while playing this, it was his turn to hide. He ran as far as he could into the bush, and after a minute, he hid below a huge log, about 60 inches thick, that had fallen over, keeping quiet and waiting for his friends to come and find him. A little while had passed, he started to hear a rustle and someone walking on the other side of the log. He decided he wanted to scare his friend, so he jumped up real quick, made a loud noise. To his horror, what stood up on the other side of the log was not his friend, but a huge, hairy, bipedal creature. It had hair all over its body except its face, chest, and it was obvious it was a female, with large drooping breasts. The creature seemed as startled as he was, but he did not hang around for a conversation. Instead, he bolted as fast as he could back to where his friends were, never looking back. He told me that he can remember that experience like it was yesterday, some 40-odd years later, and hasn't told many people because most just laughed and even his friends were skeptical. Well, I hope you enjoyed these stories. I've told a few people, but I think these events should be recorded in some way because it happens all over the world and it needs to be told. Happy hunting and fishing. Keep up the good work. You can use my name. Cheers, Joel Wells. Joel, I hope you're still here. I appreciate you, man. Appreciate that generous gift of your time sharing here, and please do it again. And you're right, it should be shared everywhere, all the time, always. Truth, right? We're lacking truth in society so big time. Okay, I hope the wind isn't too much for you guys on this microphone or the camera. I guess we'll find out once this hits you guys, right? Camping, cards, and fight or flights. Title this email. Steve, I discovered your videos about 6 months ago. I've never been a Bigfoot aficionado, so I've never spent time in scrolling through the internet looking for info. No doubt. However, I manage an electronics controls system production laboratory, and to keep myself and other technicians entertained, I play various podcasts during the week. Every Thursday is known as Tinfoil Hat Thursday because we choose a topic that the topic is all that we play all day long. Sometimes we all get a good chuckle out of things that we hear. But one day I hit a video of you reading letters from people that had experienced encounters with Sasquatch, and one of the letters that you read froze me in my chair. Let me give you a little history about who I am before I tell you my story. My name is Jim. I'm 58 years old. I started hiking, hunting, and fishing as a young boy. I was 7 when my father first took me squirrel hunting with him. I've hiked, hunted, and fished on both sides of the Sierras, as well as the Blue Mountains of Oregon, and the Appalachian Mountains of Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. My whole life. I've never been afraid of the woods. I'm also a Navy combat veteran with multiple combat tours over a 30-year career. 22 of those years were with the U.S. Marine Corps. I'm comfortable in my own skin, and I'm not afraid of anyone or anything. When in the woods or on the street, my head is always on a swivel, and I'm extremely aware of my surroundings. And by the way, my story also includes my disabled veteran son. Up until I listened to the stories on your site, I had never considered myself to be one of those people. You know, those silly people that tell stories about the hairy boogeyman in the woods. You and your listeners changed that for me. In the late summer 2015, I'd been retired from the military for 3 years and was living in North Carolina. My son and I were reminiscing about a 141-mile Appalachian trail hike that we had taken together when he was 16, and we decided to go camping together for a weekend. My son's disability prevented us from considering any kind of long hikes, but we really wanted to re-experience a little of what we had shared those many years ago. So, we picked a weekend for our camping trip and chose a familiar area on the Appalachian Trail. The place that we chose to camp at was Standing Indian Mountain. Standing Indian Mountain is within the Nantahala Wilderness area, but is easy to get to via Forestry Service roads that permeate the woods around it. Standing Indian also has an interesting Cherokee mythology. The Cherokee name for Standing Indian Mountain is Unwitsul Nunyi, which translates to where the man stood. According to the Cherokee, the remains of a Cherokee warrior inhabit Standing Indian. The warrior had been tasked to keep a lookout for a winged monster that had been stealing children. The tribe discovered the lair of the creature and prayed to the Great Spirit for assistance. Their prayers were answered when the Great Spirit destroyed the monster's lair with great bolts of thunder and lightning. However, the lightning frightened the warrior that had been asked to watch for the creature from the top of the mountain, and he abandoned his post. According to the myth, the warrior was turned to stone because of his cowardice. So there you go. Anyway, the Friday planned 4 came, and we packed up the car with the camping gear and headed off to the mountains. We arrived at a small dirt parking area at the bottom of the mountain, loaded everything on our backs, including a 12-pack of beer, and headed up the trail for about 3.5 to 4 mile hike. Once on top of the mountain, we chose a site on the edge of a large cliff with a large clump of small trees and very thick brush next to it. We set up our very large tent at the edge of the cliff, and as close as we could get to the clump of trees and brush with our door opening toward the forest. Since we were really glamping rather than camping, we also had collapsible chairs and enough food to keep us well fed for the entire weekend. By the time we had everything set up, it was starting to get dark. We lit a campfire and enjoyed dinner over beer. It was getting chilly, so we decided to throw all of our food into a bear bag and find a branch to hang it over. We found a tree that was about 150 feet from the tent at the edge of the woods, tossed a line over a branch. It was about 17 feet up in the air, hauled our big bag up, and secured the line to the trunk of the tree. After making our way back to our campsite, we put out the remains of the fire, went inside the tent, opened our chairs up, and settled down for an evening of bullshitting and planning for the rest of the weekend. After a while, we got bored and decided that we would break out a deck of cards. We emptied a backpack and rested it between us on our knees as we sat in the chairs. We were enjoying ourselves, smoking cigarettes, sipping another beer, each while quietly playing cards. We were really enjoying ourselves. After one particular deal, I picked up my cards to look at them, and all of a sudden the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I glanced at my arms and I had goosebumps, and I was overcome by a gut-wrenching fear. I was frozen. I couldn't move, but I slowly raised my eyes to look at my son. My son was pale and was staring straight in my eyes. I told him the hair was standing straight up my arms and neck, and that I had goosebumps. He nodded down towards his arms, and when I looked, he was covered in goosebumps, and the hair on his arms was standing up too. That is when I noticed that the entire forest around us had gone silent. No frogs, no insects, or night birds, just a thick silence. We sat there staring at each other what seemed like forever, but I know that it was only 5 or 10 seconds, and all of a sudden we heard and felt a huge boom, like a tree had fallen or a large boulder had hit the ground, and it sounded and felt like it was only about 25 to 30 feet from our tent. We were both scared shitless. As we sat there, still feeling that sense of dread and fear, nothing I ever experienced in combat ever caused me to experience this level of fear. My fight or flight instincts kicked in, and so did my son. He reached over and picked up his tomahawk, and I reached over and picked up my e-tool, a small collapsible shovel, and we both nodded at each other as we dropped the backpack and the cards to the floor of the tent. We opened the tent flap and stepped out next to where a campfire had been. As we stood outside the tent, facing the area of the woods that we believed the large thump/boom had come from, our adrenaline was peaked. The cloud cover had dropped low enough so that we had about 2 feet of fog rolling over the ground in front of us. I couldn't shake the feeling that some predator was out there, just beyond the edge of our sight. We both raised both of our arms up, holding our weapons, trying to look as big as we possibly could, and we both walked out about 10 feet away from the tent and began scanning the edge of the woods with flashlights. It was spooky as hell, with the fog and dead silence all around us, and all of a sudden the sense of fear and danger disappeared. I looked at my son and asked him if he was okay, and he nodded and asked me if I smelled anything, which I didn't. Then the insect noises started back up again. My son asked me if I thought that maybe a bear had gotten our food bag, and that's what caused the big thump/boom. I asked him if he wanted to go look. He chuckled nervously and said, "Not by myself," which is totally not like him. We both started out toward where we had left our food bag hanging, and once we got within about 20 feet, we could see it still hanging on the branch where we'd left it. So, with the fog swirling around our feet, we walked back to the tent and stood by the campfire, lit cigarettes, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. After a few minutes, we went back into the tent, but had way too much nervous energy to go to sleep. Eventually, about 2 hours later, we both crammed ourselves into the corner of the tent that was closest to the cliff's edge, right up against a clump of trees and brush. It was the only place that felt safe, and we went to sleep. There were no other events that night. The next morning, we both woke up, and without saying a word, we started packing up our gear, even though we had planned to stay the entire weekend. We ate a cold breakfast and started heading down the trail toward the car. We still had 8 beers left, but as we were halfway back to the car, we ran into a group of hikers heading the opposite direction. We stopped them and offered them the beer, which they gratefully accepted. We got in the car, drove home, never talked about it again. Neither of us complained about our weekend being ruined. We just knew that it wouldn't be a good idea to hang out there for even one more night. We had no clue as to the significance of what had just happened, and we never spoke about it again. 5 years later in my laboratory, I hear you read through several letters that could have very easily been my story. The absolute gut-wrenching fear, the goosebumps, the unnatural, heavy sudden silence as if the entire forest was holding its breath while it waited to see whatever was about to happen. When I heard those stories, I got goosebumps all over again, and that sense of fear came right back inside my head. I've never experienced anything like that in my life, and I had never given the incident another thought after my son and I drove away from Standing Indian Mountain until the day that I first listened to you read someone else's story. A week or so later, I brought the incident up to my son and asked him if he remembered that night, and he nodded his head. I asked him if he knew what it was that had invaded our camp that night, and he said no. Then I told him what happened. Then I told him what I had heard on your site. He told me that he had never talked about it to anyone, especially any of his military buddies. But how do you tell your battle buddies that something in the woods scared you enough to make you feel like a scared, helpless little baby? We both recently done a lot of reading and research on the Sasquatch topic, and we both agree that that is exactly what happened to us that night. When I shared what happened with 2 of my other sons, they acted like they believed me, but kind of laughed it off like I was embellishing the story. As soon as I hung up the phone, I found out later, after speaking to them, they dialed their brother up and asked him if it really happened. I wish that I could have seen their faces when he told them the exact story that I had told them, all the way down to the last detail. I don't need you to read this story because I know what happened to me, and I have my son as a witness. You can read it for your listeners if you want. I don't give a tinker's damn what anybody else thinks. I'm not afraid to go back into the woods, but I do want you to know, Steve, as well as your listeners, you and your listeners opened my eyes and provide an explanation to a mystery that I would have never cracked before. Never grokked before. Thanks, Steve, and keep up the good work. It matters. You're damn right it matters, man, and so do you. And everybody here, and I appreciate you taking your precious time and donating it here. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure you're going to knee-jerk a few others to email us in their truth, right? Which we all want to hear. There you go. Speaking of which, and my eyeballs are probably sucked back in my head, but whatever. I'll sleep when I get home, maybe. Down on this timber right behind me is where I had the living shit scared out of me last year by myself right here. I came back here intentionally, brought Sarah. I don't believe I was bringing her to any danger. I believe if I was truly in danger here, then I wouldn't be here. She's burnt sage around here, and she says in her mind, she told me last night, she said in her mind, every morning, every night, to leave us alone, we're just here to get our food. I said the same thing out loud the first night here. Everything's been okay so far. Have seen the signs of the people here for sure. In the timber. But we've made our peace, so we'll see how it goes. We've been showing respect so far, right? But that fear I had last year here was something else. I've never done that before in my life. Packed up and booked like that in my life. Next email is titled, You asked Bigfoot description from Adna Hills. It's going to be older, unfortunately. Steve, it's Mike Roy. Thank you for reading my story. After you read my story, you asked for a description of what I saw. No problem, sir. It's burnt into my soul. And here is her description. As I looked behind the tent, it was 0500. I didn't add in my story that I had a flashlight, nor that I stoked the fire. There was enough light for me to make out her face and her body down to her knees. Her face was dark brown in color, like a chocolate lab color. Her skin was smooth, no wrinkles. Her hair wasn't covering the mid part of her face. Rather, the hair stopped at her sideburns, down to the bottom of her chin on both sides. Her head hair was mid-forehead, messy. Shoulders, they were nearly 4 feet across, round and subtle shoulders. I said, quote, it was a female, boobs and all, end quote. Yes, breasts were muscular yet sagging down to the upper stomach. Nipple definition obvious with no hair around them. Stomach was pot-bellied but muscular. The hair was slightly thicker than that of the face, but thin enough to see definition. Her arms came down to lower thighs, her hair thick and much longer. I'd say about 5 inches in length. Massive legs, width bigger than waist. Groin had thick hair covering, no obvious parts visible. What captivated me was her face. Large, almond-shaped eyes, just like ours. Slightly yellow scalar, the white part of the eyes, with dark brown or black pupils. No hair, but the skin was weathered. No wrinkles. Smudged nose, nostrils slightly forward, large eyebrows with noticeable brow ridge. Thick lips, roughly 4 inches wide. I noticed her face more than anything else, since she seemed to be actually smiling. Much like humans, I know they can impress emotion. Her physical appearance scared me. I believe she stood about 8 feet tall, and as we looked at the tree she stood by, her head was even with a branch we later measured to be 8 foot 1 inch. Everything about her was amazing. But as I said, when I felt my father's hand touch me, I was at peace with her and somewhat more curious. That's all I remember, Steve. I sure hope that helps. I couldn't see past her knees. She was standing in the brush next to our site. These beings are real. It's not imagination, Mike. You know what? I think I remember that. I think your father took you back there. Was your father or grandfather? Sorry. Hold on a minute. Father. Yeah, I think your father. I think the email is when your father knew all about them and took you back there intentionally, I believe. Wow. What a visual to have tattooed in your brain for the rest of your life, right? And not the only person. Okay, what have we got here? These are all older emails that have been waiting, unfortunately, and there's no way out of it. There's thousands of them. No bears behind me yet. Good sign. I know I'm talking loudly, but this wind is super loud around my ears, so I hope you can hear me clearly. Maybe I'm talking too loud, maybe I'm not, but this is freaking loud around here. Promised Encounters, titleless email. Hey Steve, I might have sent this to the wrong address, so I'm resending it. It sets the foundation for the series of encounters to come. It's Pat again. A couple weeks ago I sent you my thoughts on facts and conclusions. I mentioned that I had a number of encounters to relate, so here goes. At the outset, let me say that I've always had an open mind with regards to the possible existence of these beings. Now I have no doubt whatsoever. The encounters involve my 30-plus-year-old daughter and her 40-plus-year-old friend, and to a lesser degree myself. My daughter and her friend are intelligent, educated women who successfully run their own businesses. I would trust either of them to make life or death decisions for me if I could. We live in Maine. The first encounter took place in an area where previous sightings have been reported. They were driving in a somewhat rural but not remote area. There are farms, orchards, and wooded areas. In most locations, you can see your neighbor's house from yours. They were looking for a specific address when my daughter realized that her GPS wasn't working as it should. She pulled into a driveway to get her bearings when a huge, hair-covered creature walking on two legs came out of a tree line, crossed the yard, and went into another tree line. This was on a February day in broad daylight. She backed out of the driveway and headed down the road. Neither one spoke for several minutes. Finally, her friend asked, "Did you see it?" She replied, "Yes, it wasn't a bear, and I don't want to talk about it." She eventually, albeit reluctantly, told me weeks later. One of your videos had an email that suggested that encounters like this result in people being tagged and subject to further contact with these beings. I now believe this to be a case given the series of events these women have experienced over the last few years. These will be related in future emails. It seems that once they know that you know, they aren't shy about showing up on a regular basis. Regarding the creature, the only description they gave was very tall, massive, cleared the yard in a few steps, towered over the clothesline, and if it had been near the vehicle, an SUV, its knee would have touched the side view mirror. More to come, Pat. Ooh. Holy shit. Right? And here's another one. Okay, so that was 210315. Hold on a second. This is an email that came before that email. I guess I found them at the same time, put them in the same file here. Hey Steve, I'm a 68-year-old legally blind man in Maine. Please forgive any typos due to my condition. I've been watching/listening to you for a couple of years now. Keep it up, it's working. I have several encounters I'd like to share, but not today. I want to commend your position regarding the conclusions people draw regarding these beings. Unfortunately, the so-called Bigfoot community is so narcissistically focused on their conclusions that they ignore or twist the facts to support the confirmation of biases. I have no doubt that much of this is done to hide the truth. To those confused as a result, I can only offer the following observation. Conclusions are generally drawn based on the culture of the individuals drawing them. Their upbringing, education, religion, interests, etc. influences their perceptions, decisions, and actions. Oh, it's windy. Hope you guys can hear me. Thermals are ripping right now. Their upbringing, education, religion, interests, etc. influences their perceptions, decisions, and actions. As regards to these beings, if a person encounters one, his or her mind will probably go to what influences them. If it's UFOs, they're aliens. If it's religion, they're Nephilim. If it's mysticism, they're supernatural. If it's science, they're apes. I think you get the point. I got you. Picking up what you're putting down. The issue is not the conclusion. The problem arises when people get dogmatic. Now the conclusion becomes more important than the facts as each group or individual wastes effort trying to confirm their own bias. I believe your approach is the right one. While you show due respect for your viewers' conclusions, you keep the focus on the facts. It's the only way to get the true picture regarding these beings. Let me know if you got this. Keep fighting the fine fight, Pat. Pat, I hope you're still here, man. Because I got it, and I read it, and I hope it wasn't too late. For you. Nothing I can do about it, but I get to them eventually. And that's a good email. Good words. Appreciate you, Pat, and I hope you email me back. We want to hear more, man. Truth, question mark? I don't think we would like the truth, is the title of this email. Dear Steve, appreciate all you're doing all you are doing for this topic. Enjoy your videos and your first book. Looking forward to the second one. I'd like to take a moment to offer my opinion on why we are being kept in the dark on this topic. I think I'm rather pragmatic about things and feel you are too. What it comes down to in my mind is greed. Ultimate greed leads to a sense of power, and that can lead to corruption. There is more money than we can imagine tied up in resource extraction. Timber, minerals, oil, and gas are all very valuable commodities, as well as real estate and infrastructure. If the governments that control access to these things suddenly admitted there was an elusive bipedal society in our wilderness, it would open the floodgates of bureaucracy and red tape. The treaty huggers would lose their collective minds and have a new reason to prevent anyone from even thinking about entering the forest. Anyone wanting to develop anything already has come up with environmental impact studies, gender impact studies, economic impact studies, and so on and so on. It gets complicated. Given the fact that it would be virtually impossible to do Sasquatch impact study, they would want to know the territory the family group occupies, what part and how much of that environment do they require to sustain themselves, how much of a buffer they would require between humans, and on and on and on. I suspect that the Sasquatch would be less than cooperative, and all this could then halt just about any activity, including camping, hiking, hunting, and fishing too. Since the vast majority wrongly think Sasquatch isn't real, it would stand to reason that any analysis would be constantly, if not permanently, stalled. It's been proven time after time by governments that if a little bit is enough, then way too much is even better when it comes to regulation of any sort. For instance, recently, a Quebec river has been given legal personhood and been granted 9 rights. Still bewildered at that one. I think there are too many fingers. I think our too many fingers are in too many pies. And when money talks, a lot of voices go silent. Yes, I do believe it is wrong. I've heard you read some truly heartbreaking stories and how too many lives have been negatively impacted by these encounters. For the most part, I think the Sasquatch just want to be left alone and not bothered, and they feel we're encroaching on them rather than the other way around. They are trying to protect their families just as all of us would. But I agree that if we all had the facts to make an informed decision, so many people would be better off. I wish I had an answer on how to solve this problem. It seems like an impasse. Anyway, Steve, as I said, this is just my opinion. Keep up the good work and stay safe out there. What you're doing is extremely important, and for that, we're all very grateful. Sincerely, John Ostendorf, Ottawa, Ontario. John, appreciate you, man. I guess if that's the route that it went, if that's the route that the douchebags at B, powers that be, if they took that route to softly disclose to the population of worker bees, they might throw down, that might go down about our resources and access to them. But, there's the but, from what I've discovered. The Vatican played the largest role in helping to annihilate Dr. Melba Ketchum's career and squash the peer review papers and make sure that people do not find out the truth about the DNA. Just the DNA, the Vatican. So, I'm pretty sure at this stage of the game, the Vatican probably doesn't give a shit about any of these trees behind me or the minerals I'm standing on. Small hunch, but I'm probably correct. So, that being said, what does the Vatican stand to lose if these beings are acknowledged? That's probably one of the more important questions to be asked, and that's probably going to be one of a true, accurate, honest answer to that question is probably going to launch us forward a lifetime in trying to figure out truth. That's what I think. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. My gut's telling me I'm in the right direction. I was personally, I truly believed it was all about logging and minerals extraction, etc. for a long time, but for me and my journey, I don't think so at all. At this stage of the game, nope. It's got nothing to do with habitat. No, not when the Vatican is, not when the DNA is about to get delivered to the population and the Vatican steps in shitting themselves. Right? Anyway. This should do for now. I'm gonna have to try to get a nap in because we don't waste any minutes out here. And I gotta try to decide where I'm gonna take Sarah for the evening hunt. And either way, it's either gonna be a big hike or a big quad ride and then a hike. And then home to bed. And then tomorrow morning we have to get up at 3:30. Gotta get up at 3:30, do a huge quad ride to get around this mountain, where I discovered the sign of a very large bull or two on the top of this mountain, fresh. So he's up there, and we ran into his cows today too up there. So the only way to get up there in time before it gets too hot in the morning is to quad all the way around the mountain, hit this trail that I do know of, and we have to march up there in the dark. And I've got her on board. So I better get my ass in gear and see if I might be able to catch an hour nap. And then see what happens tonight. Hope it goes down. If not tomorrow, we're probably gonna leave my trailer and my quad with some friends up north here, and then we're going to go home. But she's like, we're coming back. I can't believe it. Isn't it amazing? She has got to be the toughest kick-ass woman toughest kick-ass woman I've ever met in my frickin' life. Very, 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 very proud of her. She's just amazing me by the minute. I can't believe it. It's pretty cool to watch. Somebody pick this up and become passionate about it, honestly, on their own. Well, I mean, I'm with her, but I can read people's reactions and energy easily, and she is truly, honestly passionate about getting this healthy food for the house, and she wants to get it done. And I know she's very uncomfortable. She's very tired. This is right out of her element. She's a glamper. She's gone to remote living in a tent. It's amazing to watch, and she wants to get this done very badly. It's kind of cool to watch, right? And if you've seen the hike that she did today, I thought she would have had a meltdown today for sure. Nope. She's fine. She's ready to do it again tomorrow in the dark. Pretty cool. I'll share what happens when we get there. I've been using a 360 camera too on our hikes. I hope it works out properly, but I don't know how to load it onto the program yet, but I'll figure it out. I'll share it with you. Share my story, howtohunt.com. Get it in. Get it in. Links to Sarah's stores in the description below. It's all hers. Subscribe if you want. It all goes to feeding kids. And that's all I got. I'll be back tomorrow.